Imagine you come to work in the morning. You open Outlook, you sign in. You open Teams, you sign in again. You open SharePoint, another authentication prompt. Then you open Salesforce, ServiceNow, or some other business application and you're asked for credentials again. And this is just the beginning of your workday. Now think about how many applications you use every day, how many passwords you have to remember or you are expected to remember. How many times do you have to enter those passwords? And how many times do you have to stop what you are doing and approve and multi-factor authentication notification? Open an application, enter your password, MFA, open another application, sign in again, and another MFA prompt. After a while, authentication itself becomes a source of user fatigue. And when users are managing dozens of applications, organizations also have a bigger problem. Different applications may have different authentication mechanisms, different passwords, different security policies, and different ways of managing user access. So, what if you could have one identity, one authentication experience, and access to multiple applications without repeatedly entering your credentials? That is the basic idea behind single sign-on or SSO. But here is where things get interesting. If I'm using one identity to access all these applications, is that actually secure? What happens if someone gets access to that identity? Does SSO simply mean that we are putting all our eggs in one basket? And does single sign-on actually mean that Entra ID is logging me into every application? What happens when I access an application for the first time? How does the application know that I have already authenticated, and what exactly is being uh, exactly is being exchanged between the identity provider and the application? This is where concepts like SAML OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect, tokens, identity providers, service providers, and Microsoft Entra ID come into the picture. So in this video, we are going to start from the fundamentals. We will understand what single sign-on actually is and why organizations use it. We will look at the difference between authentication and authorization. Then we will understand how single sign-on actually works behind the scenes. We will break down SAML OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect and understand what each of them is designed to do. And finally, we will move from theory to practice. I will configure and demonstrate single sign-on using Microsoft Entra ID so you can actually see what happens when a user accesses an application, gets redirected to the identity provider, authenticates, and finally gets access to the application. By the end of this video, you should not just know the single sign-on, but you will know what actually happens behind that sign in button when you get sign in with Microsoft, sign in with Google. So let us start the video. What is single sign on? Now that we understand the problem, let's define single sign on. Single sign on or SSO is an authentication mechanism that allows a user to authenticate with a trusted identity provider and then access multiple applications without having to authenticate separately to each application. The important part here is the identity provider, like Microsoft Entra ID. An identity provider or IDP is the system responsible for authenticating the user. In a Microsoft environment, Microsoft Entra ID can act as the identity provider. The applications that rely on that identity are commonly referred to as service providers or SPs. So these applications are integrated, so service providers and your identity providers are integrated, linked so that they can use the single sign-on authentication mechanism. So instead of every application independently authenticating the user, we can have a model like this. User is there in the identity provider, and the identity provider links to multiple applications. It integrates multiple applications. For example, user Microsoft Entra ID in Teams, user Microsoft Entra ID and Salesforce, user Microsoft Entra ID ServiceNow. These um, the users authenticate with the identity provider. An application can rely on that authentication through an SSO protocol. This is an important point. SSO does not mean that user's password is shared with every application. The application does not need to know the user's Entra ID password. Instead, the application and the identity provider establish a trust relationship. The identity provider authenticates the user and then provides the application with information that allows the application to establish a session for that user. Exactly how this information is exchanged depends on the protocol being used. For example, enterprise applications commonly use SAML, while modern applications may use OpenID Connect, which is built on OAuth 2.0. We will look into all these protocols and their details in coming sections of this video. So, if we reduce SSA to one single concept, the user authenticates with a trusted identity provider. The applications rely on that authentication instead of asking the user to authenticate separately, and that is the foundation of single sign-on. Before we look at how this process actually works, however, we need to understand one fundamental distinction: authentication and authorization. Authentication versus authorization. Now, these two terms are often used together, but they answer two completely different questions. Authentication asks, who are you? So this is authentication part, and it asks, who are you? It is like asking your identity. When you sign in with your organizational Microsoft account, Microsoft Entra ID needs to verify that you're actually the person you claim to be. Now, that involves different things like a password. Your first thing is your user ID, a password, a multi-factor authentication, Windows Hello, right? And FIDO 2 if you're using uh, like a FIDO 2 for higher authentication assurance level, or any other supported method. Once you verified, you are authenticated. So this is the authentication part. So now you prove that you belong to this identity provider. Your identity provider knows it is you. Now let us come to the authorization part. So, but knowing who you are is the only first step. The next question is, what are you allowed to access? That is authorization. So, for example, Entra ID may successfully authenticate you as an employee, but that does not mean you should have access to every application in the organization. You might be authorized to access Teams. Uh, uh, you might be authorized to access SharePoint. You might be authorized to access Salesforce, but some HR application which is there, you might not be allowed to access, or some part of it you are not allowed to access. So authentication tells you who you are, authorization determines what you are allowed to access. Now take a real world example. Now let us take this example. So you have an identity card, you verify your identity, but then do you have access to a specific area? You have proven your identity here, right? So someone knows that you are the part of the company. They will let you in through the main gate, but there are server rooms that you are not allowed to access. There are different parts of the building that you might not allow to be accessed. So that was a simple understanding of authentication versus authorization. Now, one important point for SSO, this distinction becomes particularly important when we talk about single sign-on. When you sign in through an identity provider such as Microsoft Entra ID, authentication establishes your identity, but your successful authentication does not automatically mean that you can access every application. The organization still needs to determine whether you are authorized to access the particular application. For example, user authenticates. So authentication tells you who you are. So authentication, you have proven your identity, but then yes, it is simple. Then you go to applications to access the application. The authorization will tell you which application you can use and which you cannot use. So we have discussed it. Now that uh, so simple, this simple distinction in mind we should keep in the rest of the video. Authentication is who you are, and authorization is what you are allowed to access. Now that we understand these two concepts, we can look at how single sign-on actually works and where authentication and authorization fit into that process. Now that we understand what single sign-on is and we have separated authorization and authentication, let us look at what actually happens when a user tries to access an application. Let us take a simple example. Imagine that you're already using your Microsoft's uh, account, your organization's Microsoft account, and you want to open an application. Now, take it as ServiceNow, Salesforce, whatsoever it is, and it is integrated or uh, it is an integrated application, and Microsoft trust it as service provider, and the application trusts Microsoft as identity provider. So the Entra ID as an identity provider. Now, when you open the application login page or service now login page, now that application wants to know who you are, who the user is. So here, like if you're trying to open this application, um, sorry. So if you're trying to open this application, now what this application, if it is integrated and information is there, it will give you an option to log in with your Microsoft account. Now, what happens when you click on login with Microsoft account? Now, it does not ask you for credential, rather it redirects you to a Microsoft login page. Now, this is Microsoft authentication page. There you prove Microsoft, you provide your ID, you provide your password, you uh, give your multi-factor authentication with or Windows Hello whatsoever it is. Now Entra ID verifies the user's identity with passwords, MFA, Windows Hello, or any other method. Now after Microsoft authenticates you, now if it is successful, it sends you back to the application. Now there is a transaction that happens from Microsoft to the application. It sends the information, your information, to the application that proves uh, that you belong to Microsoft. So Entra ID sends an authentication response, and that response is sent using SAML, OIDC, or OAuth that the application can trust and validate. Now, this information sending is the key of single sign-on. Now, when application receives a success in information from Microsoft and receives the user information from Entra ID, it processes it and it grants the access to the application. Now, the application does not manage your credential. It trusts Microsoft Entra ID to authenticate you. You sign in once, and multiple applications rely on that authentication. So, and browser sessions also play a major role that I'll demonstrate. And why single sign-in is powerful: user authenticates once with the trusted identity provider. Application trust the identity provider, not separate passwords. Seamless access across multiple applications. So this is the SSO flow at a glance. So user goes to application, application redirects to Entra ID page. Now Microsoft Entra ID sends user with authentication response. Based on this authentication response, it grants access to the application. Now let us see what happens in practical and what single sign-on actually looks like in practical. I have two different applications here. Both of these applications are configured to use Microsoft Entra ID as their identity provider. I'm not going to configure anything right now. So when we reach the demonstration part, how do we register the OIDC or SAML application? I will give you some demo from the beginning, like how do we configure these applications. Now, for now, these applications, this one demo SaaS, it is my own built application. It is running on my local PC and it is integrated for OIDC. And this is another WordPress website which I have installed miniOrange and integrated it. So let us see what happens if I go to demo SaaS. There is a button that I have created which tells you to sign in with Microsoft. So if I click on sign in with Microsoft, the application itself is not asking for your credentials, right? Instead, it redirected me to Microsoft Entra ID. That becomes the application trust Entra ID to authenticate its users. Normally, any web application that you'll see which takes your user ID password, it will give you a login screen. But this is redirecting me to my Microsoft Entra ID login. So I can use my Entra ID account by qs.onmicrosoft.com and click on next because spelling mistake. And here we enter the password and click on sign in. So now you can see at the top the URL says login.microsoftonline.com, common login. Okay, now this application is requesting some permissions. As I am a global administrator, I can click on consent on behalf and click on accept, and this application will log me into the dashboard. Now you see I never had to put the application specific user ID password. Rather, it redirected me to Microsoft where I proved my identity, and then it came back to the dashboard page directly. So the second application that we will use is this, and if I click on I do not have to enter email address password. I will click on login with miniOrange OIDC. I click on it. So we already have in this incognito window, we already have authenticated to DemoSAS, which asked me for my username and password. But here, let us see what happens. If I click on login with miniOrange OIDC, it simply logged me in because my session is already established with Microsoft Entra ID. Now, if I open any other application, outlook.office365.com, now it will not ask me for credentials. It will ask me to select the account. No password, nothing is required, and I will be able to log in. So this is how the single sign-on works. It works uh, like you have authenticated once, and then the session that is running with Entra ID, it locks you into all integrated applications. Now that we have seen how single sign-on works at high level, we need to understand what actually makes that communication between the application and the identity provider possible. So if I talk about identity provider, it is Microsoft Entra ID, and if I talk about service provider, it is the application which is integrated with Entra ID. Now, there are several protocols and standards that you will commonly encounter when working with modern identity and access management. And we will discuss three of the most important ones are one is SAML, SAML, and OAuth 2.0, OpenID Connect or OIDC. You will often hear these three terms together when talking about authentication, authorization, APIs, and single sign-on, but they are not interchangeable. They were designed to solve different problems, and this is an important distinction to understand before we start configuring application. So in the next few sections, we will look at each of these technologies separately. So we will discuss in detail what a SAML is, what OAuth 2.0 is, and what OpenID Connect OIDC is. For now, if we talk about SAML, so SAML, it is enterprise single sign-on. So uses SAML assertion, and its purpose is to authenticate users for single sign-on. Now, the second is OAuth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is an authorization technology. It uses access token to authorize the users, like what users can access. And then the OpenID Connect is a technology which is built on OAuth 2.0. It is authentication plus authorization. So its base is OAuth 2.0, but it adds a layer over uh, OAuth 2.0 for authentication. So OAuth 2.0 is authorization, and OIDC just adds an authentication layer at the top of it. So they solve different purpose. They have different roles. They work together, and let us discuss each technology in detail. Let us start with the SAML. So what SAML is? It stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. Now, the name sounds complicated, but the basic idea is quite simple. SAML is a standard used to exchange authentication and identity information between an identity provider and an application, or you can say service provider. And it is widely used for enterprise single sign-on. Let us take a look at the flow, how it works, and let us take a practical example. Now, the service provider is Salesforce, and identity provider is Microsoft Entra ID. So a company does not want to create or uh, provide separate login credentials for Salesforce to its employee. So what they will do, they will go ahead and integrate the Salesforce application into Microsoft Entra ID for single sign-on. And now what happens when a user tries to log in? So the user opens the Salesforce login page. Now Salesforce need to know who the user is, right? That is what every service provider or every application want. They want the user to log in. So first what it will do to get the user's identity, it will redirect the user to the identity provider. It will redirect to Microsoft Entra ID. Now the authentication happens in Microsoft Entra ID. User sign-ins and Entra ID verifies the identity. What happens after that? Now this identity provider creates a data in SAML format, which is sent back to Salesforce. So Salesforce, my Entra ID sends it to back to Salesforce. Now in that assertion markup language, security assertion markup language, there are attributes which are passed on to Salesforce by Microsoft Entra ID to assure that the user who is trying to log in is actually authenticated and can be valid. So now Salesforce trusts Microsoft Entra ID and it grants access to the user. The user is inside the application. From a user perspective, it is very simple. They can see the user will open Salesforce, authenticate with Enter ID, and return to Salesforce, and access is granted. Now, user access Salesforce using their corporate identity, no separate Salesforce password is required. So, what is a SAML assertion? A SAML assertion is a statement made by the identity provider about the user. Uh, what a SAML assertion can contain. So, this it will contain um, who authenticated the user's identity, when the authentication occurred, information about the user such as their email address, additional attributes that the application may need. Based on the application permission, they might need additional information, and this SAML assertion contain this data about the user. So it answers these questions: who authenticated Microsoft Entra ID? Subject is user identity, user at company.com, authentication time, when the authentication happened, email users, user at company, or what is the user ID, group roles, what is the role of the user? It is from the sales team, project user, or an administrator of the application. Additional attributes like department, sales, location, all this information. So in an assertion can contain this value. When Entra ID passes this information to the application, it adds the answers in the assertion markup language, and it sends it to the application. Now the application gets the answer and it provides user with an access. So a SAML assertion is not user's password, a very wrong misconception that in single sign-on, the password is captured by the application. I am discussing it from the very beginning of this video. A SAML assertion is not the user's password. A password is not what SAML is designed to exchange, or the information that is passed on to the identity provider in the SAML assertion, it does not include the password. The identity provider provides a digitally signed assertion that the service provider can validate. So the identity provider provides the SAML assertion uh, data to the application, which application will validate and assign the access. If anything is changed in between, or if somehow this SAML assertion is uh, intercepted or changed, then the authentication will not happen. We will look into the SAML and understand all the terms and how do we configure this SAML assertion. Why does the application trust Entra ID? This is another important question. Why should Salesforce simply believe whatever Entra ID sends it? So, the simple answer is it does not trust anything blindly. What happens when we configure the SAML SSO, the identity provider and service provider establish a trust relationship? That is why the application integration is done in Entra ID, and there are details during the integration which is shared between these two platforms, the identity provider and the service provider, and it establishes a trust relationship. The application is configured with information about the identity provider, including information that allows it to validate the SAML response. The SAML response is also digitally signed, so the application can verify that the response came from the expected identity provider and that it hasn't been altered. That is what allows the application to trust the authentication performed by Entra ID. One more important concept here, SAML does not actually perform the authentication. The distinction is worth remembering. So, the application does not give you a user ID or password prompt to log in. Rather, it redirects to the Entra ID link. And the technology that works behind this is SAML. We think SAML performs the authentication, but it does not actually perform the authentication. It is the Entra ID which performs the authentication. SAML provides the standardized way for Entra ID to communicate the authentication result to the application. So if someone asks, does SAML authenticate the user? The better way to think about it is the identity provider authenticates the user and SAML communicates the result of that authentication to the service provider, and that we know that happens through the security assertion markup language. So finally, we have understood SAML. In the end of the video, for SAML and for OIDC as well, I will show you the demo how we integrate an application, how we register an application inside Entra ID, what is an enterprise application, and what is application registration. So for this SAML part, understand the flow once again. Step 1, the user wants to access the application. Second step, the application redirects the user to the identity provider. Step 3, the identity provider authenticates the user. Step 4, the identity provider creates a SAML assertion. Step 5, the SAML response is sent back to the application. Step 6, the application validates the response. Step 7, the application establishes a session for the user and the user gets access. That is the fundamental idea behind SAML based single sign on. In the next section, we can go one level deeper and look at what is actually inside a SAML assertion and the key SAML parameters you will use when configuring an enterprise application in Microsoft Entra ID, such as entity ID, reply URL, and sign on URL. Now let us move to OAuth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is one of the most widely used framework for authorization in modern applications. And there is one thing that I want you to remember before we go any further. OAuth 2.0 is primarily about authorization, not authentication. In simple terms, OAuth answers the question, what is this application allowed to access? Let us understand this with an example. Imagine you install a photo printing application. You want this application to print some photos that are stored in your Google Photos account. The application needs access to those photos. Now imagine the application says, give me your Google username and password. You probably would not want to do that because now the application has your actual Google credentials. And once it has your password, you have no easy way to tell the application you can access my photos, but you don't access my email. So in your Google account, you have your emails, you have your photos, and Drive application. So if you give the password, everything, uh, all the files can be accessed with the password, and you cannot control whether you tell the application you can only use photos or Google Drive files, or it can see or reply the emails as well. So it gives kind of absolute authority if you give away the password. The application, this is where OAuth 2.0 solves the problem. Instead of giving the application your password, you can authorize it to access only the resource it needs. For example, you might see something like allow photo print to access your photos and you approve it. But you have not given photo print your Google password. Instead, the authorization system gives the application an access token. So let us understand with the flow how it goes. So this is the application. Now it wants to access your Google Photos. So what it does, it sends a request to the Google's authorization server, Google or Microsoft, whatever it is. You authenticate and authorize the application. So you have to authenticate on Google, and then after, like, unlike SAML, there is no assertion which is sent. So the Google will see the request, it will authenticate you. After it authenticates and looks at the authorization request, you approve it. So it will tell you this application wants to access your photos. So you click on approve. After you click on approve, the authentication server, it issues an access token which is sent back to the application. Now that access token has the authorization part. Okay, we have authenticated the user, and user has approved you the application to access the photos. So it issues an access token. So access token, we will discuss what actually is access token. Now with this access token, the application goes to the resource server. It goes to the resource server. Now resource server validates that access token, and it sees that in this access token, photos I should allow, like photos are allowed to be shared with the application. So it will share the photos. In this same access token, it if it does not say that email should also, this application is also permitted to see the emails, then the application cannot see your emails or drive. So access token is necessary what you authorize the application to use. Now the with access token, it goes to the resource server. Resource server checks the access token. Based on that access token, whatever resource is requested and whatever you have authorized, it it is returned to the application. The application is given access to it. So instead of giving you a password, the access token uh, takes the authorization part, and whatever you have authorized that the application can access from your resource server, it will provide that protected resource. So I think that is good understanding. That is how I understand. So the application get access to the resource using an access token, not your password. Now let us look at a demo of OAuth 2.0. I have Canva open. This is an application which most people are using to edit photos and videos. So to demonstrate, if I click on the plus sign here, if you see this plus sign, so this plus sign, if you see, if you click on this plus sign, it will give you an option to import. So you click on import here. From import, you see Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, or Airtable, whatever it is, but we have to integrate the application. So we click on Google Drive. After it goes to Google Drive, it will ask Google Drive wants to connect your account. So you click on connect. Now I can select any of the accounts here. If I click on my account, Google will allow Canva integrations to access this info about you. First, it will ask the information, like it will tell you what information it can access. So it can access my name and profile picture, my email address, and we click on continue. After we click on continue, it will select what Canva integration can access. So see and download your Google Drive files. So you can put a check mark there. See, edit, create, and delete only the specific Google Drive files that you use in this app. So you check it. Now this is the set of permission which it is asking. So the first part, we'll go back there. So you will click on connect, and first thing is it took me to the Google authentication server. Now we provided to the Google, we provided the authentication. Look at the URL. It is accounts.google.com at the top. Sign in and OAuth ID. So you can see this part very clearly. So it is OAuth protocol which is working behind it. So this is the authentication part. So you click on continue, and it is the authorization part. So this is the authorization server which will tell Canva what you can access and what you cannot, right? So this is what we discussed in OAuth 2.0. If you want me to make a detailed video on how an integration works and how you can actually see what all applications are integrated and what access you have given to those applications, because in everyday life we use Google account, we use our mobile phones, and we authorize so many applications every day. A time comes when we forget. So if you want, I can create a video how to manage those permissions, manage those applications inside your Google account. But this is a basic demo of OAuth 2.0. So I'm not going to integrate anything now. I'll click on cancel and move away. So what exactly is an access token? Now we know that OAuth allows us to grant an application access to a resource without giving the application our password. So the next question is, what does the application actually use when it wants to access that resource? That is where the access token comes in. An access token is a credential issued by the authorization server. that represents the access the application has been granted. You can think of it as a temporary permission ticket. The application presents this ticket when it makes a request to the resource server. For example, in our Canva and Google Drive example, Canva wants to access files in your Google Drive. So, after you authorize Canva, Canva receives an access token. So, and with that access token, it goes to the resource server. So when Canva requests a file from Google Drive, it presents that token to the Google Drive. That is the resource server. Google Drive can then check the token and determine whether the requested operation is permitted. So the relationship looks like this: application, access token, resource server, and based on that access token, resource server will provide the resource. The application does not need to send your Google username and password with every request. Instead, it sends the access token. The permissions are important. An access token can represent a specific permission. For example, an application might be allowed to read files but not delete files, or it might be allowed to read your calendar but not modify your calendar, or perhaps it is allowed to send emails but not read your entire mailbox. This is important because authorization does not have to be all or nothing. The application can receive access that is limited to what it actually needs. The tokens also have a lifetime. An access token is generally not something the application keeps forever. It normally has a limited timeline or a limited lifetime. When that token expires, the application needs to obtain another valid token through the appropriate OAuth flow. This is another reason an access token is different from a password. You don't want an application holding a permanent credential that gives it ongoing access indefinitely. An access token is meant for the resource server. There is another subtle but important point. An access token is issued for a particular resource or set of resources and is presented to the resource server when the application makes API request. So, when an application should not simply take an access token issued for one service and assume it can be used everywhere. For example, a token intended for accessing one API is not automatically a universal key for every other API. So, a simple way to remember this is, think of an access token like a temporary access badge. Your employee identity might give you access to a building, but the badge can contain specific admin rights. Office floors, you can go. Meeting rooms, you can go. Server rooms, you cannot go. The badge does not reveal your password. It simply represents the access you have been granted. An access token works on a similar principle for application and API. So the takeaway is, an access token represents delegated access. It tells the resource server what the application has been authorized to do without giving the application the user's password. OAuth and Microsoft Entra ID. Now let us bring OAuth back to Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID can act as an authorization server for applications that need to access protected resources. A very common example is Microsoft Graph. Now, imagine we have an application that wants to read information from Microsoft Graph. The application can request a specific permission such as user.read. That permission tells Entra ID what the application is asking to access. Based on if this is a delegated permission, the user signs in and grants the requested access, subject to organization consent policies. Entra ID then issues an access token. The application uses that token when it calls Microsoft Graph. So the basic flow is application request permission. Uh, so an administrator grants the consent. Entra ID acts as an authorization server. After the consent for that Graph API is granted, Entra ID issues an access token. With that access token, Microsoft Graph can read the users. So this is the actual flow you can remember. The application is not given unrestricted access. It requests specific permission and Entra ID issues a token that represents only the access that has been granted. But here is where people often get confused. You may hear someone say OAuth is used for login. That is not quite the right way to describe OAuth 2.0. OAuth 2.0 is fundamentally an authorization framework. It allows an application to obtain permission to access protected resources. But OAuth 2.0 by itself does not define a standard way for an application to establish this is the identity of the user who just signed in. That is a different problem, and that is where OIDC comes into picture. So remember the distinction. OAuth 2.0 is authorization. OpenID Connect, OIDC. It is an authentication built on OAuth 2.0. And this distinction is extremely important because a modern application may need to do both. It may need to know who is the user and also what is this application allowed to access. So OAuth 2.0 addresses the second question, OpenID Connect addresses the first, and that is exactly what we will look at next, how OpenID Connects uses OAuth 2.0 and provides modern application authentication. Now let us take a look at OpenID Connect, commonly called OIDC, and as we discussed earlier, it is authentication layer on top of OAuth 2.0. So OAuth 2.0 asks what can this application access, and OpenID Connect asks who is this user. That it focuses on authentication, where OAuth 2.0 it focuses on authorization. That is one of the key distinction. So and why do we need OpenID Connect? Let us make a simple example. Suppose you build a web application and you want users to sign in using their Microsoft account. You don't want to build your own username and password system. Instead, you want Microsoft Entra ID to authenticate the user. The user clicks sign in with Microsoft. Your application sends the user to Entra ID. Entra ID authenticates the user. Once authentication is successful, Entra ID needs to provide information back to your application so that the application knows who has signed in. This is where OIDC comes in. OIDC provides a standardized way for the application to obtain information about the authenticated user. So it is authentication plus authorization. And this OIDC, OpenID Connect, is built on OAuth 2.0. That is one of the most important thing to understand and remember. OpenID Connect is not a replacement for OAuth 2.0. It is an authentication protocol built on top of OAuth 2.0. It uses the OAuth 2.0 framework and adds the pieces required for authentication. One of the most important additions is the ID token. When we discussed OAuth 2.0, we checked the access token. We came to know about the access token. Now here with OpenID Connect, The other thing which is added is the ID token along with the access token. So what is this ID token? So ID token I have put on the slide here. So this is the ID token. What is the ID token? When the user successfully authenticates with the identity provider, OIDC can provide the application with an ID token. The ID token contains information about the authenticated user or about the authentication event and the user. For example, it can contain claims like the user's unique identifier, name, email or preferred username, information about the identity provider, when the authentication occurred. The application can use this information to establish the user's identity and create its own application session. So we can think about the two tokens like this. So ID token, it contains the information about authentication and the user, and access token is permission to access a resource or API. This distinction is extremely important. And if we look at a simple OIDC flow, so you open the application again, like other single sign-on technologies, you open the application, it redirects you to Microsoft Entra ID, and the user authenticates. The Entra ID issues the tokens, the two tokens as we talked about, the access token and the ID token to the application. The application uses the access token to call the API and ID token to know who the user is. So that is a simple flow. Like it is same for all the OIDC, sorry, SAML technology. But OIDC, with OIDC we introduced, or Microsoft introduced, ID token or access token, where if you purely use OAuth 2.0 like Google trying to access your resources, then it is only the access token which comes into picture. So that is a basic difference between OIDC and OAuth. So OIDC versus OAuth 2.0. This is where we can make the distinction very clear. Imagine an application wants to access your Microsoft Graph data. That is an authorization problem. So OAuth 2.0 provides the framework for obtaining an access token. But if the application needs to know who just signed in, that is an authentication problem. OpenID Connect provides that capacity and uses the ID token to communicate information about the authentication. So OAuth 2.0 is authorization and OpenID Connect is authentication plus OAuth 2.0. So that is, if someone asks you what is the difference between OIDC and OAuth 2.0, then I think this answer will be good. App registration versus enterprise applications in Microsoft Entra ID. Now that we have covered the authentication protocols, let us look at something you will work with frequently in Microsoft Entra ID. App registrations and enterprise applications. These are two closely related, but they serve different purpose. So here in Entra ID, you see these two places, enterprise apps and app registrations. Actually, you can integrate an application from both the places, right? You can integrate it from enterprise applications. You can go to app registrations and register your application. Now, let us understand what app registration is. An app registration is where you register and define an application with Microsoft Entra ID. This is typically where you start when you are developing your own application and want it to integrate with Entra ID. For example, we saw in our BIMO application that I was demo SaaS application that we were registering, and it needs to authenticate using Microsoft Entra ID. We created an app registration for BIMOS for that particular application. Now, this is where we uh, get and configure things such as application, like name of the application we will give. Like suppose for this demo, I give the name of the application as test. Supported account types, whether it will support a single tenant or multi-tenant, and redirect URI. This is an optional value that we need to put. However, let us understand what this redirect URI is. This redirect URI tells Entra ID after the authentication happens where to send the user back. Now, if I select web here and we give like www or like this https byqs.com/homepage, right? So what happens, it after the authentication to my byqs application will happen, it will send it back to the home page, but this has to be coded in the application as well. Now, if you provide something incorrect here and application does not have that page, then it will throw an error. Sometimes you have to leave this field empty. It is an optional, and we will, when we configure some OIDC application in the demo, we will see where do we put this redirect URI. Now, at the bottom it says register an app you are working on here. Integrate. So if you are developing your own application, use app registration. If you are using any gallery application and other apps from outside your organization, by adding from enterprise application. So these both the places you can register an application. So we understand app registration is nothing but simple. It defines the application and how it communicates with Microsoft Entra ID. Now let us come to app enterprise apps. Enterprise application represents an application inside your Microsoft Entra tenant. This is where administrator manages how the organization actually uses that application. For example, from enterprise apps, you can manage which user and group can access it, whether assignment is required, single sign-on, configuration, conditional access, targeting, provisioning, and other tenant specific settings. So in simple terms, enterprise application is about managing the application's access or use, how you use it within your tenant. So what is the relationship between app registration and enterprise apps? So this is where people often get confused, and frankly speaking, when I started, I also usually uh, got confused with this. Now, when you register an application, Microsoft Entra creates an application object. When that application is made available in a tenant, Entra uses a service principal to represent that application in that tenant. Now, that service principal is what you see as the enterprise application. So think it like app registration, it defines the application. So app registration is, it defines the application, and enterprise application manage application in your tenant, and it represents. So what you configure, application ID and directory tenant ID. So when you register an application, we will see how do we get the client ID and tenant ID. Redirect URI after authentication, where the users will be redirected. Authentication settings like OIDC or OAuth 2.0. So important point to remember in app registration, if you are using an application which requires OAuth 2.0 or it works on OIDC, it is recommended that you start with app registration. You can give the API permissions You can generate certificate and secrets, branding, and other application properties you can do from application registration. Now, with enterprise application, what you manage, who can access the group, and it works for single sign-on configuration. And more specific, if you are using a SAML application that uses SAML, so it is enterprise applications is the place where you should start. Now, so it is clear, the final what I'll tell you finally is, if you are building your own web application, then and I want users to sign in with Microsoft Entra ID, then I'll start with app registrations. And this is particularly common with OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0 applications. So if your application is OIDC, you should start with app registrations. If it is a SAML, so like it is a thumb rule, you should start with an enterprise app, but don't treat it as a strict protocol rule. App registration does not mean OIDC only. Enterprise application does not mean SAML only. Both are part of Microsoft's application model. The distinction is more about what you're trying to accomplish. If you are building and registering an application, app registration is generally where you start. If you are integrating and managing application for your organization, enterprise application is generally where you will spend your time. The easiest for an existing enterprise application such as ServiceNow that I want to integrate with my organization, I will typically work through enterprise application. Now, let us we have reached a point where I'm ready for a demo. So I will go ahead and create a demo. So we will use WordPress plugins called miniOrange, and miniOrange provides you both SAML and OIDC capability. So we will look into that demo now. So let's start with this website, the WordPress site that I have built for this demo, and the URL is oidcdemo.bycus.com/wp-admin. Now, any application, whether if you are integrating it, it will need the initial administrator user ID and password. So there has to be an application administrator, I would say many a times. In with some applications you don't need that, but actual administrator will be there. So let us first log in as an administrator to this WordPress page. So I'm logged into WordPress admin page now. And from here we go to plugins and we will install the plugin, and we will search for miniOrange OIDC. So we see here two plugins. One is SAML IDP, login with website users, and other one is when we are using OIDC, it is showing OAuth client here. So we will go ahead and install now. So it is installed and we will go ahead and activate it. And here is an option to configure. So we are here on the configuration page, right? Now, so this is the application we want to register with WordPress. So what happens whenever you are registering an application with Entra ID, whether it uses SAML or it uses OIDC, whatever it is using, do not be scared how do you configure it, because all the application will come with a manual. So if you're working and somebody asks like, I want to integrate a SAML application or OIDC application, always go ahead and check for the documentation or ask the application administrator about the documentation. Now here, if you see, we have a documentation available for this mini orange OAuth single sign-on as well. So, like I went through the documentation, but we will go ahead and quickly add register this application. Now, so configure OAuth. It says configure OAuth, and it says add new application. So click on add new application. Now, here are all the identity providers listed here. So we will choose Azure AD as we are integrating it with Entra ID. So we'll click on Azure AD. Now we have to fill on these fields, right? So we have to provide it an app name. We have a callback URL. We have client ID. We need client ID, client secret. What are the scopes, like what this application will access from your tenant. Now authorization endpoint. So this is the authorization endpoint. We need to change it. We need to put the tenant ID here, and the token endpoint. So we will have to put the tenant ID in this place. Now what is authorization endpoint? This is the URL where the authentication will happen. So this will come from Microsoft Entra ID. If you put the tenant ID from your Entra ID, it will identify that the user from this particular tenant is trying to access the application. We will quickly look into it. Now token endpoint is login.microsoft online. So this is the token that will be generated. So this is the URL for the token which will be generated. So first of all, you copy this callback URL. We discussed this is the point after authentication where the application will take you. After the authentication happens, where the application should redirect you. So we need to know this callback URL. So I have copied it. Now app name, we will change it and make it miniOrange simple OIDC. All right. Now client ID and client secret we need to provide. Now we will have to go ahead and create the application in our Entra ID tenant. So this is my Entra ID tenant, and I am registering an OAuth application, which is OIDC application. So we will start with app registration. So we click on app registration, we click on new registration. What I'll name it is mini orange OIDC. Single tenant only, so we'll keep it single tenant. The options are multiple Entra ID tenants, any tenant, personal accounts only. But we know this application we are integrating it for our tenant only, so we'll keep it single tenant. Now redirect URI we copied, right? So it is a web platform and we will put the redirect URI that we copied from the miniOrange application, and we click on register. After we register, we are getting an application ID here, we are getting an object ID here, we are getting a tenant ID here. Now what this tenant ID, it is an identifier of your Entra ID tenants. We'll go ahead and copy this, and application ID is the application inside your tenant. So this is your tenant ID, this is your application ID. So this is an identifier for an application that you are using in your Entra ID. So I'll copy this value as well. The third thing that I'll need is a certificate or a client secret. So if we go back to the miniOrange page, it is asking for client secret. So we will provide it a client secret. Now how do you generate the client secret? And a very important thing to remember about client secret is This client secret you should not give away. You should not give it away publicly. You should store it in the key vault, Azure key vault. The application that you are creating, it becomes an enterprise application of service principal. Now, if you do not want to give away this client secret, you can configure this application with an RBAC role of key vault reader, the secret reader, and it can read the secret from there. But for the demo, we are not going that deep because we are only discussing OIDC. But the point to remember is you do not give away this client secret publicly. You should not share it with anyone. Second is when you create the client secret. So let us create it. OIDC demo secret, and I'll keep it bare minimum, recommended 6 months, 90 days, or I'll keep it custom. Start date, I will keep it today, or let us make it 3 months because I'm going to share this secret on the screen. I'm sharing my screen. I'll not blur the screen for this part. Uh, When the video is published and you are watching it, this client secret is already gone. Now, the name of the client secret is OIDC demo secret. This is the secret ID. It is an identifier of this secret, and this is the value. Make a note of this value immediately. It remains for about 15 minutes, or as soon as you walk away from the screen and you go to certificate and secret, you can still see it, but it goes away in 15 minutes. 15 minutes is the timeline. After that, you cannot see it. We will come back to this screen and see the secret. It would be all encrypted, right? So I have copied this value. Now we will go ahead to miniOrange and provide these values. So this is the tenant ID we copied, right? So yeah, we will first look into client ID. We'll put the client ID here, and we will put the client secret here. All right. Now we have to provide the authorization endpoint. So we will take the authorization endpoint to, we will enter the tenant ID here, and we will enter the tenant ID here. If you want to register it with any tenant, you need to change it and make it common. And click next. So this is how it looks like. And we click on finish. Now it is running a test, right? So I will log in with the admin account. It is a global admin account. Now this is the consent it will ask for. So sign in and read your profile. You consent on behalf, because I'm a global administrator, so you have to provide the consent on behalf of your organization. So you click on accept and click on done. Now the configuration test completed successfully. Click here for attribute mapping configuration. Now what is this attribute mapping? So attribute mapping is nothing but it is the information about the user who is signing in that will be fetched by miniOrange, right? So we will go ahead and click on finish. Now we will go to the attribute mapping tab at the top and get test API security. I don't think it is working as expected as of now. So we'll go to right. Or you can go to here, attribute role mapping. You should get it from here. Yeah. So Now, what is this attribute mapping? It will, the information, as we told you, it will take from the Entra ID. So it will take a username. What will be the username? It will be the, you can simply select as name and email address. So email is not a field here. So you can take UPN as the email address and click on save settings. That is done. Now we will go ahead and log out from this page. Now you see there is a button which appears, which is login with miniOrange OIDC. Now I click on login with miniOrange OIDC and it logged me in, right? Because it is logging me in with Entra ID. Now we will go ahead and open it in another incognito tab and we'll see what happens. So I will copy this URL, we'll close this incognito mode and we will go to new incognito window and we will paste this URL. Now the login page is here, login with miniOrange. When you log in with miniOrange, now it does not need your user ID password, rather it will ask you for your uh, click on, oh sorry, the spelling mistake is there. I always do that. Nothing to worry about. Click on next and we enter the password. If MFA is configured, it should come after this, but MFA is disabled for now. So you click on sign in and you get to get inside. So you can see the ID that I used was from Entra ID. And now here is a very interesting thing to mention. This user, however, it is signed in with the Entra ID, but this user does not have any access. It is only a user because that comes with the default subscriber WordPress role. So further in the application, in the WordPress, you go to miniOrange and you can define the roles there, who can be admin, who cannot be admin. So here, what is happening? You are logging in with your Entra ID application. You are given a basic role, which is the subscriber role. You cannot create any post, you cannot do anything, you cannot change it here. So the application, there comes the application administrator. They go ahead and create the roles in the application, and so that calls for a complete setup. So if you want a complete setup of miniOrange OIDC and how you can manage things in WordPress, we can create a separate video. But do comment if this was a comprehensive and understanding demo for OIDC. OIDC is quite simple, and any application which is built for SAML or OIDC, they have their own documentation, then they have their own interface. The only thing you will get confused when you are using a command line where you have to configure everything on your own, and that we will discuss when I create a video on Graph APIs separately. But remember, there is nothing to be scared. If there is an application, they will have a documentation, a step-by-step process, how to integrate, how to create roles. So that is good for miniOrange as well, but we can discuss it in some other video. So OIDC, I think it is clear. If it is clear, do comment kind of yes in the comment section. And one more important thing that I want to mention here. So this was an OIDC application. We registered it in app registrations. So you can see it in app registrations here. However, if you go to enterprise apps and you go to all applications, you can see this miniOrange here. And if you click on it, it will give you options, right? Conditional access. So it is an OIDC application. So you are not getting any option to configure SAML. So now let us go ahead and configure the miniOrange SAML application.
All right, so I already have configured the SAML demo.bycues.com and I'm on the settings screen. So you have to log in with the administrator account, the application administrator. In this case, I'm the administrator for the WordPress website. Now I have installed the plugin and I'm ready because installing the plugin and all we showed it when miniOrange OIDC we were configuring. Now I'll go ahead and open the my Entra ID and to register as this is a SAML application. As this is a SAML application, we will go ahead and add it into enterprise application. So I'll click on enterprise application. Here I see all applications and now we click on new application. Now in enterprise application, it will show you the app gallery. So you can either add the application which is already available. And remember, it is not like you add an application from here like ServiceNow and all. You will be able to access that application because suppose you are using ServiceNow and you are using Zoom, you should have an administrator account still inside these applications so that you can configure the single sign-on and you can manage the application. Now, here as it is miniOrange, let us search for miniOrange, right? And let us see if that is available. So we find that this application miniOrange is not available. So we will go ahead and click on create your own application and we will name it miniOrange SAML. Now if I see miniOrange and it is finding, we found the following applications that may match your entry. However, integrate any other application you don't find in the gallery, non-gallery. So we select this option and we click on create. So it is creating the application. I think it has created the application. And just to show it to you, if I go to app registrations, will I be able to see this application? So I go to all application and I see miniOrange SAML application. Though we are using enterprise apps to register this application, we can see it in the app registrations as well. So don't get confused. If from app registrations, if I go to this miniOrange SAML application, I see all the details here, but I do not see any um, option, any GUI apps option to add the SAML authentication to this application. Now I can go to branding and properties. So that clears it out. Like any application, whether you register from app registrations or you register it from enterprise apps, the apps will show in both the places. However, now we have to go ahead and integrate this application. So as I stated earlier, if it is a SAML application, we will do it through enterprise apps. Now I click on enterprise apps and I see this application is registered miniOrange SAML. I'll click on miniOrange SAML and it gives you an option set up single sign-on. So we click on set up single sign-on and here we have the SAML. So I click on SAML. Now we have this screen to configure this application. Now first thing is identifier. Now what this identifier is, it is also known as entity ID, and then we have reply URL, which these two fields are required. As the name suggests, identifier entity ID. It is for Microsoft to understand, the identity provider to understand which application is this. It is the unique identifier of the service provider in case the SAML application we are configuring. So this miniOrange should have one unique identifier, and that is known as entity ID or identifier. Now, the second thing that we see here is reply URL, assertion, consumer service URL. As we talked in SAML authentication, there is uh, assertion. In assertion language, the information is shared to the application. Now this reply URL is the same thing, which will answer where should I enter ID, where should enter ID send the SAML response. So this is the place where this enter ID will send the SAML response. So remember, this identifier and reply URL, both you will get from the application page itself. Now we see three additional fields, which are sign on URL, relay state, and logout URL. These are optionals, but let us understand what these fields are. Now sign on URL is nothing but where does the user start. It should actually be the home page of the application or the login page of the application. Relay state is an optional. So what is relay state? After authentication, where should I take the user? After the authentication happens, where Microsoft Entra ID should redirect the user after authentication. It is same as reply URL in OIDC that we configured. And logout URL is where should the application handle sign out. Logout URL is what tells Entra ID where the application handles logout request. It is used when you want the SAML integration to participate in a logout flow. So this is the logout page, which is defined through logout URL. So easiest way to remember is all five. Identifier, who is this application? Reply URL, where does enter ID send the SAML response? Sign on URL, where does the user start? Relay state, where should the user go after authentication? Logout URL, where does the application handle the sign out? Now the second option that we see is attribute and claims. Now what is this attributes and claims? Now this section answers a simple question. After I authenticate the user, what information should I send to the application? So in the SAML, there is an assertion code which is sent to the application. Now in that language, in that assertion language, what all are the information that enter ID will send to the application about the user? It will be handled through attributes and claims. Now, for example, in our configuration right now, it is given name is user.givenname. This means send the user's first name, surname is send the user's last name, and email address is send the user's email address. It is simple name and unique user identifier, which is user.principal name. Now, in the SAML response, this information will be sent to the application. Now, to fill this option, we have to complete the first one. Now, as I told you, identifier and reply URL, we will get from the miniOrange application. Now, if I go back to this miniOrange application, so I see this the following fields here. Note the following configuration for IDP. Now, this is the recipient URL. This is, let me start from the beginning. It is SP identity issuer. So it says samldemo.bycus.com, WP content, plugin, miniOrange SAML 20 single sign-on. Now, so in this case, from the miniOrange SAML plugin, we will copy the SP entity ID, which is the issuer ID, and copy it, and this is our identifier of the application. So we will go to this screen and we will click here and click on add identifier and put this value and the reply URL we need, which is assertion consumer service URL, and we will go back to the miniOrange plugin and we will copy the assertion URL. We will copy it and we go back to this place and we click on PyQs. For now, I will leave the optional fields as it is and click on save. So it is saving the application. So it says saved single sign-on configuration, right? Now we close this window. Now we see, no, I will test later. So this field is done and attributes and claims. So actually you can edit these fields. What attributes or of the user will be passed to the application, the miniOrange from Entra ID. For now, it looks good. So that is okay for the demo. If you click on edit, you can choose the add a new claim and you can choose, you can name the claim and you can select the attribute from Entra ID that you can claim, but we will stick to the default for now. Now we have the third place, we have SAML certificates. So here, if we see now, what are these certificates? Now we come to the section SAML certificates, and the important one here is the token signing certificate. Now, what this token signing certificate is, think of this certificate as the digital seal that Microsoft Entra ID uses to sign the SAML response. So the SAML response which is being sent, this SAML certificate, the token, it acts like a seal that proves that the SAML response which is being sent by Microsoft. After Enter ID authenticates the user and creates the SAML assertion, it signs that assertion with its signing certificate. The service provider, for example, miniOrange or ServiceNow, can verify that signature. So the basic idea is Entra ID creates SAML assertion, then it signs it, application verifies the signature. This gives the application confidence that the SAML response really came from the identity provider I trust, and it has not been modified. So the status is active. Thumbprint is the certificate thumbprint. Expiration, the certificate has an expiration date, and the um, email notification email is the global administrator who is setting up this SAML authentication. And this is app federation metadata URL. This is often the easiest way to provide the identity provider information to the application. The metadata contains information such as Entra ID's SAML endpoint, identity provider identifier, token signing certificate, and other federation configuration. So instead of manually copying all this information, the service provider can consume the federation metadata. Now let us look it into the SAML miniOrange SAML integration. So we have completed this part which says service provider metadata. So this is service provider metadata, and we have provided like this to Entra ID so that Entra ID knows who is the service provider. Now we will go ahead and configure IDP configuration. This is the identity provider configuration. Now here we are using Azure AD, so we will click on Azure AD. Here you can see enter IP metadata manually or upload IDP metadata. So identity provider name is like Microsoft, I'll say Azure AD, and it says upload metadata or enter metadata URL, right? So you understand. So either you can do it manually, you put the same name, IDP, entity ID or issuer, SAML login URL, SAML logout URL, it is a premium feature, and X509 certificate. So you can put the certificate, character encoding, assertion time value. You can do all this, or you can go to upload IDP metadata. For now, I am going to upload the IDP metadata. From where you get this metadata? Now, for SP provider metadata, you get from miniOrange, and you have to provide it to identity provider for a trust relationship. And for IDP configuration, you have to get the information from IDP and put it into the application. So we will go Azure AD. We will name the application. We will do an upload IP IDP metadata. Like we'll know it Entra ID. Upload metadata. You can upload, or and from where you get this file. It is from here. So you can see you can get the download certificate, download metadata XML. Like it depends on the application what it accepts. Now this application is accepting app federation metadata URL. So we will go ahead and copy it, and we will put here, and we'll click on fetch metadata. Please match the requested format. Only alphabet numbers and underscore is allowed. So we will make it Entra and click on fetch metadata. It's taking a bit time. Let us see. Identity provider details saved successfully. So it is Entra ID. This is IDP entity ID or the issuer. We can see it back if we go to so it is stswindows.net. So it is, you see Microsoft Entra identifier is stswindows.net, right? This is there. SAML login URL is login.microsoft.com, and SAML logout URL, it is not there. And SAML login URL I see X509 certificate. So this certificate is, it shows the certificate there. Character encoding, assertion time validity, and you can click on test configuration and it will try you to log you in. So we are not doing this. We are using the ByQ's account. And let us see. And we click on next. Sign in. Stay signed in. Yes. And this test is successful. So we have provided all the information. And it says note, the SSO button has been added to the login page. Now here we will close this window. This is configured. Uh, we think as we think now. So we will go ahead and open a new incognito window, and we will go to SAML demo.byqs.com/wp admin, and we click on it, and you see login with Entra ID, the name of the application that we gave. So you click on login with Entra ID, and you put uh, and password we'll put. Stay signed in. Now this user can log in with the Entra ID credential. Now we have another user here, which is device user. So we will go ahead and log it out, and we will log in with Microsoft Entra ID again. Now the session is configured already, so let me open a new incognito window and try to do it. So it is SAML demo.bycues.com. That is the page. You have to go to WP admin, and it is logging in with the same ID. It is not asking for. All right, try new incognito window and say samldemo.bycues.com/wp admin and log in with Entra ID. And our user this time is device user at bycues.com. And all right, so when we sign in with this user, it says miniOrange SAML. Sorry, but we have trouble signing you in. Your administrator has configured the application miniOrange SAML to block the users unless they are specifically granted access to the application. This is nothing but this application does not have, um, it has not, like the user, the second user that we are that is trying to access is not assigned with any to use this application. How do we go ahead and fix that? So you go to Entra ID. If you get this error ever, you go to Entra ID and you go to users and groups and add user and group and click here. It says none selected. So you go ahead and add this user, which was our device user, and select it. Click on select and click on assign. So this is added now. Now we go back to the same login screen and we go back once and wait. Now the same thing, we need to approve. Now you can see this device user is able to log in. So from where we control the users and groups, assign the user from users and group section. This was a simple demo for OIDC and SAML where I used miniOrange. And as this video is already almost, how much? I think it is almost 1 hour 50 minutes long, almost 1 hour 50 minutes long. So I'll end this video here. Hope you had a concept of what single sign-on is, how SAML works, how OAuth works, and how OIDC works. Now, with the miniOrange application, I showed you how you configure the SAML. Maybe in some next video, we will go ahead and describe all these fields, what is provisioning, what is application proxy. But in that case, you should have an application and seriously like getting service now and learning service now. So your role, if I talk about your role as identity and access management in the identity and access management, you can only control this part. Rest all will be controlled by the application administrator. So it is not exactly like I don't know everything. So I know the Entra ID part. So this is the Entra ID part you can configure. Rest you will have to work as a team, like a ServiceNow team will be there, a miniOrange team will be there, an application developer will be there, a WordPress developer will be there. But so far, I have shown you whatever is there from Entra ID side, how to register a SAML and OIDC application. In next video, I think I will try to cover up how to add the single sign-on to on-premise applications, the applications which are on-premise, which are not publicly available or not available on the public internet. Still, we can integrate those applications. So, if this video was a great learning for you, or you learned something new, then do comment is like learned something or want to learn, or good learning like this. If you have any questions, do put in the comment section. I will go ahead and answer these questions for you. And this video is actually I created after I got a request on the SAML OIDC and single sign-on video. So I'm glad I will reply to the user who requested, and I will reply with that your video is ready. So similarly, if you want to learn anything, you can put it in the comment section and I'll create the video for you. Thank you and have a nice day.